There is no explaining this simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. Ann Patchett, Tom Lake. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shamansky with Ramya Amathan as always.
Hello.
What's up, Rams? Today, we're reviewing the latest book from critically acclaimed American author Ann Patchett. Tom Lake explores themes of love and loss, the quiet beauty in the small things in life, and an optimistic outlook on life's unpredictability. These are somewhat vague themes that would be very difficult for most authors to weave into a story. But if there's one author that can pull it off, it's Ann Patchett, because she's well known for her impactful explorations of the human condition. Commonwealth, The Dutch House, and Bel Canto are some of her most well-known titles. Karen McKay is the communications manager at CELA, and she, as the original recommender of this title, is here with us for our in-depth review. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
You were the one that originally recommended this book to Ramya, and then Ramya sort of recommended it to me. So you are my proxy recommender for this book.
And the original reason for the recommendation, for some more full context, is we were reviewing This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune on this show. And I said, I want a romance book recommendation that I will love. The pressure is on because I'm very hard to please with romance. And that's when, Karen, you sent me an email recommending this book because you took it upon yourself so kindly. And I loved this book. Now, wait, can I ask the first question around the table? Like, would all of us categorize this book under romance?
Good question. I'd say no, honestly. It's not really about the romance. And I feel what makes a romance book romance is the fantasy aspect of it. It doesn't end up being this escapist type of romance. Like, yes, it involves two different romantic relationships, but it's not about the escapist aspect of it, if that makes sense. What do you think, Karen?
Yeah, I'd agree that it's probably more general fiction, but the love stories that are within it, I just really loved the way that Ann Patchett portrayed them. And when Ramya asked for something that was sort of more of a romance book, maybe for older readers, if I can say that, this was one that came to mind because I read this a few months ago and I just loved it.
Yeah.
Before we really jump into this, let's give you a little idea what this book is all about. And the best way to do that is by reading the synopsis. Here we go. In the spring of 2020, Lara's 3 daughters return to the family's orchard in northern Michigan. While picking cherries, they beg their mother to tell them the story of Peter Duke, a famous actor with whom she shared both a stage and a romance years before at a theater company called Tom Lake. As Lara recalls the past, her daughters examine their own lives in relationship with their mother and are forced to reconsider the world and everything they thought they knew. Tom Lake is a meditation on youthful love, married love, and the lives parents had led before their children were born. Both hopeful and elegiac, it explores what it means to be happy, even when the world is falling apart. This is an 11.5-hour-long audiobook, and we have a little sample for you.
When the doors opened at 8 o'clock, so many people flooded in that Veronica and I had to hustle back to our table to get ahead of the crowd. We were instantly, overwhelmingly at work. Yes, I assured one woman and then another, if you read for Mrs. Gibbs, you'll still be considered for Mrs. Webb. What I didn't say, though it was rapidly becoming evident, was that if you read for Emily, you would still be considered for Emily's mother. In a high school production, it was not uncommon for someone 15 to play the parent of someone 17. But community theater was a different cat. That morning, the hopefuls were all ages, not just old men looking to be the stage manager, but college types who came to read for Emily and George. The Emilys wore too much makeup and dressed like the Amish girls who sold cinnamon buns at the farmer's market. The Georges slyly checked out the other Georges.
That was from the book Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, copyright 202E by Ann Patchett, recording used with permission from Harper Audio, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. And if you thought you recognized the voice of the narrator, that was famous actress Meryl Streep,
She was
which I thought
so
she did
good.
an amazing. She was so good, eh?
So good. I loved her.
I don't know about you, but this was easily one of the best narrated books I've ever read.
Hands
Easily
down.
in the top 5.
Yep.
Fantastic.
She actually won an Audie Award for this production. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
I think she won for Best Fiction, if I'm remembering correctly.
And well deserved too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get the conversation started with a pretty vague question. How are we all feeling after reading this one? Like, how did this book leave you feeling once you finished it?
Oh, that's
Karen,
a
do
great
you want to go
question.
first?
Yeah, Karen, go first. Inspire us.
Inspire you. So I read this a few months ago, as I said. And then I picked it up again last week, and I didn't get all the way through it the second time, but I remember feeling very melancholy, a little bit bucolic, like
Yeah.
very sort of settled, satisfied, slow. Even I would say. I just after reading lots of books recently that have had a lot of action and a lot of high energy, this one was not a high energy book, I don't think. Maybe that's attributable to Meryl Streep's audio, but it was just I just loved the way I was feeling at the end of it.
Mm. Yeah, I think
Grant?
satisfied is a good word because it's not very descriptive, but it rings very true. I felt full. This book explores, relationships, right? The human condition, as we heard in the like way that this author writes. And I think that kind of exploration left me feeling just so satisfied. Like I understand myself and these characters and the people and stories and, just the world differently.
I thought it was interesting how it's not exactly, well, it is in a way a light read, but it's not quite that,
Mm-hmm.
because it's exploring these very complex, heady themes about like life and contentedness and love and loss. And while it's like very emotionally heavy, it was a fairly easy read. Would you agree?
Yeah, and what attributes to that, you think?
I
Because I have a
think it has to
theory.
do, yeah. Okay, I want to hear your theory. My theory is it's just the outlook that the main character Lara has on life and the way she
Mm-hmm.
talks to her daughters and the way that, because this story is being told in a later timeline when she's grown up, I think she's 56 and she's telling this previous story to her daughters, she has perspective and she just sounds so content
Mm-hmm.
and feels like she has life figured out at that point. And I think that's what makes this book so good in analyzing one's life and
Yeah.
putting perspective on everything.
I'm on the same page as you. Essentially, what I feel is that she is so wise and she's maternal. And because of those two elements, or like because of those two weighing in on her perspective and then her being the narrator of the stories to us and her daughters and just the reflection process of this entire thing, it has such a calm and understood vibe to it, right? Like she's never really frustrated. And even when she's explaining and reflecting on frustrating parts of the story or frustrating times in the actual relationships and dynamics she's having with her children in real time, like with her daughters, she's still coming at it from like a very wise place. And so it kind of, that was the tone that we were getting all this stuff in. Karen?
So what we didn't really talk about is the fact that this book relies very heavily on themes from the play, the Thornton Wilder play, Our Town.
Mm-hmm.
And so the lessons that come out of Our Town, I feel like Laura has adopted and has integrated. And so she is coming at it with the perspective of an elder Emily from our town,
Right.
where she understands that we need to slow down, we need to see one another, we need to appreciate the small things, that everything that we really need is right here around us, or at least for her, it's right there around us, around her. And I think that that was part of the feeling that those of us who are very privileged might have had during COVID, was that we needed to slow down. We needed to appreciate all of the little things that were making life worthwhile in that time. And so I think you're right, Ramya, like her wisdom around that comes through, and it comes through in a gentleness and in a maternal sort of approach to how she sees herself as a young woman, how she sees her daughters now,
Yeah.
and an understanding of all of the experiences that she's had that have brought her to where she is now, and why that is enough for her.
And
I loved that part of it.
me too. Me too. The tone and the energy of her really rung through. And
as a character, right?
yes, yes. And what I really appreciated was there were moments in the book where we knew things that the daughters didn't know, right? And that speaks to her wisdom as well. She was like, I don't think they're ready for this part of the story, or these things are not going to come up in this abridged version of what they're hearing. And, it was very evident that she's still, like, she knows they're still growing up. Like, they're not there yet.
Just to be a little clear, this story at its heart is really a mother telling her three daughters about a summer she had in her youth, where she basically talks about her previous relationship, which is a really weird thing for a mother to do with their three daughters, to talk about the man she was in a relationship with before their father.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys find that strange in any way?
No, because
No.
the ex was a famous actor, and these girls were obsessed
Yes.
with him. And that's why this whole thing came up, right? Because they at one point found out, yeah, hey, mom dated Duke. What? And that became this entire story.
I still found it
I don't.
strange.
Did you? I don't find it weird, because I know I have adult daughters, and I've had conversations with them about things that I learned from previous relationships. I mean, I didn't go into the same level of story because I don't have the same level of story as the character did, but no, I didn't find that odd at all. Like, it's actually an experience that I've had. So
Yeah.
Well, you know what it made me think about? It made me think about the relationship the parents have with their children. And that goes both ways too, in that there's a lot of things that we just don't tell each other. We know kids lie to their parents all the time, but I think it also goes both ways. And once we grow up, we start to see our parents more as individuals than just infallible adult figures. And having these conversations that really make Laura, the main character, look more human and fully fledged as like a person with flaws. It just makes you think about your relationship with your parents.
Yes. And even that aspect of it, of, parents lying to kids, I will say I've had the opposite experience from you, Karen, as a mother. Me as a daughter, I've never heard anything of my parents' past. Like, there are things that are just off the table.
Guarded, right? Yeah.
100%. Like, my mom basically makes it seem like she didn't have a past, which is, a little concerning. But
I have no past.
like, shush, nothing for you to hear about. But anyways, it's because, yeah, like, these lines are drawn, but that relationship that she intentionally fosters in this book, right? The character of the mom intentionally fosters with her three daughters, and how close they are because of it. Because we saw bits and pieces where, one of the daughters, for example, Emily, is having a breakdown because she doesn't know what her upcoming marriage life will be like. If marriage is even a thing. What about kids? What about not kids? But she's able to have this very candid conversation with her mother, even though they don't always see eye to eye. And I thought that was so sweet, like on a very deep level.
It seems like all the characters in this story are very emotionally intelligent, which is very refreshing.
True.
Everyone is so mature. At
What
least
a privilege.
Yeah, it honestly felt so nice to read characters that were just seem to have their, not their lives in order, but they seem to be very, upstanding people.
Mm.
I think that part of what resonates is that she's telling the story from when she was 24, and her daughters are in that age bracket, and
Yes.
they're having such a
Yes.
different
Yeah.
experience. This is a COVID story, so the family's sort of on their family farm, and it's just them. They're picking all the cherries, and they're having these conversations while they're picking the cherries on the family farm, and their world is locked down like everybody's world was during COVID, and yet their mother at the same age was living in California and living in on the theater circuit, and she's in Michigan, and she's having these interesting relationships, and she's learning all these things about herself, and that was not the experience that these young women had. And so I thought that was an interesting aspect of the story, is that she was talking to them about all the things that she had learned, and she was relating it to them, as a mother seeing her 20-year-old daughters, 20-ish-year-old daughters, and talking about her own experiences as a way to connect with them, and as a
Yes.
way to teach them, um, and also to reconcile for herself. I mean, she goes back sometimes and she said, I missed so much. I did not understand. I was so naive about so much of what was happening
Mm.
to me at that age. And then she's talking to her daughters about how important it is to understand some of these things. And I thought it was a beautiful family relationship. I thought it was a beautiful marital relationship
Yeah.
between Laura and her husband. And also a really interesting love story about what it's like to be young and completely head over heels.
Completely head over heels, then go through the grieving of the end of that kind of a relationship, and going through the struggles and hesitations around really fully letting that go. Like, there was a lot of mental health that was brought up in this story as well, because of
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
what she had to let go of, because it was significant. Like, it might have just been a summer at Tom Lake, but it really wasn't that, right? There was so much more. And yeah, just going back to your point, Karen, about like she's conveying all these lessons that she's learned, and advisement, and hey, how important it is that you just may not be conscious of these things at that age, but also just in her own mind and wisdom, she knows that they might not understand it because they're still so young. Like, she's,
I
yeah.
appreciate. Sorry, finish your thought.
Oh, that's it. Like, she's just very cognizant and aware that they still may not get it, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate that she does it. She tells these lessons very uncondescendingly,
Yeah.
where because
Yeah.
it's the daughters like basically begging her to tell the story because they're wondering like what the hell happened? How did you even start dating this superstar, and how like what happened that you didn't stay with him for the rest of your
Mm.
life? Like there's a story there we need to know. And I love the way that the daughters interpret Laura's stories, because each daughter has their own personality and career and outlook on life, and they all interpret different aspects of her story in a very specific way. Like Nell, she still wants to be a theater actor, and so she has a particular amount of insight on the show business aspect of Laura's story.
And Emily, who at one point thought Duke was her father, who just like deep dived into dove into
Yes.
Duke's life because she was like, I got to know everything about my dad. And that comes and goes, ebbs and flows, like her ups and downs of trying to figure out where to place him now that she kind of has come to terms with her not
And
being
you
her
really
dad.
have to feel for her,
Yeah.
given what she learns about Duke throughout the story.
Yeah. It's true. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I enjoyed the father, Lara's husband, how he came into the story, because sometimes he'd come in and be like, "Oh, which part are you at?" Like, he knows, he knows all of it,
Mhm.
but he's waiting around because he knows what it means for the four of them, the four women, to be sharing this experience without him.
Yeah, he was a great character, very understated, but
Mm-hmm.
I just thought he was the epitome of calm throughout the whole story. But
Yeah.
also you could tell just how much he loved his wife and his daughters, just by the subtle little things that she explains. The whole story is quite I'm lacking the word quiet, I think, is what I keep coming back to, but or gentle. But it's really sort of a meditation on family life and the smaller things in life and how they have bigger meaning maybe than we understand.
Yeah.
And how the character Duke he's much more sort of frantic, for lack of a better word. His character
Yeah.
has high intensity. The others don't necessarily. And so it's a lovely contrast, I think, between that high intensity energy and the settled energy of being where you are with the people that you love and being, quite content in that way.
I just wanted to ask about the theater angle of all this. I think it was brilliant that they got Meryl Streep to do the narration. It was so theatrical, the performance and the whenever she kept going back into the story, Lara, of actually being at Tom Lake and what that summer felt like and the kind of physicality of everybody there because they were all theater people, right? That felt
Mhm.
so interesting to me. Like that was the part that felt big to me amongst all this, quiet and meditative
Hmm.
aspect. The theatrics were like I really had a lot of laugh out loud moments in this book, especially in the beginning, during the high school days and such, because the writing was witty and funny, and the theater was, yeah, like it felt out there, felt sensational.
The way she narrated was it was understated, but I think it really brought out the nostalgic aspects of, especially when they would jump back in time and go to her summer at Tom Lake. And the way she acted out Peter Duke, especially, it almost sounded like she was acting him out in a way that was fond. Like she was doing him a lot of favors in the way that she
Yes.
was performing him, I thought.
Do you feel it was understated?
Yeah, absolutely. She
Really?
wasn't doing like very a lot of like voice acting in that sense. It
Not
was,
voice acting, no.
she wasn't doing like voices in quotes,
Mm.
like it was just, she had a really good understanding of what was going on the page. And but she would often do these like long breaths before
Yes.
before a
Yes.
sentence, as if like she was like bracing herself for what she was about to tell her
And it could
daughters,
be
like
just like this last
yeah,
word in a sentence. I really loved the way she played with her range. Like the pauses are one thing, but also I thought that she would punctuate and exclaim certain parts of sentences that were just like we could break it down. Like, it was so well performed.
very dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. And deliberately so.
I think this is one of the books where the narration takes it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I could imagine Meryl Streep playing this character on the big screen,
Yeah.
and the movie version would be as good as the book because she sort of understood those characters, in part because I think she could relate so well to the main character. But she was just, I know I've already said this, but she was just a fantastic narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Jacob, what were you going to say?
I think every character in this book was compelling in their own way, but was there one character that really stood out to you, Karen?
Well, I loved Laura, the main character, in part because I could relate so well to her. But one of my
Hmm.
favorite characters was Sebastian, was Peter
Mm-hmm.
Duke's brother, and just watching that dynamic between the two of them and how he cared for his brother, and how when it comes back later, you learn some of the things that he did for his brother much later in the story. And I just, I don't want to offer any spoilers, but the threads of this story just, they sort of wind around each other until in the end they have this sort of beautiful, they form this beautiful tapestry of all of these little bits of story that were laid out early on. And you sort of see the symbolism and you understand why those bits were dropped into the story earlier. It's just, I think she did a fantastic job of tying all those pieces together in ways that, were not obvious as you were reading, but really had meaning by the end.
I agree. And I agree for a particular character as well. I'm blanking on her name, but the friend that she had, the understudy.
Oh, Palace.
Palace.
Palace. Oh, how could I forget that name? Palace is such a great example of that because throughout the book, I was kind of like, what is Palace? What is she really representing in this book? Because she was quite a bit arm's length. Definitely someone who knew what they were doing, but not necessarily coming off as a flawed character. In fact, she was coming off like as a goddess, for most of the description of the book.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, like subjectively from Laura's
She
perspective.
seemed a bit infallible,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
But that gets broken down.
Yeah, but that gets broken down. And then by the end of it, there's that bit where you get to unzip a little and see that, like, oh, Palace is also flawed. And we forget they're all young and still doing it for the biz. And that made perfect sense for me. Somehow throughout this book, I was waiting for that moment, and it happened. And I was very pleased about that as well. But really, like, my favorite character was Nell. Because there were moments between Lara and Nell, outwardly described, or just you could tell the dynamic was so special. And it's because Nell had a way of understanding the world that Lara didn't have to explain or teach her to do.
Yes, and the two other daughters like comment on that especially
Yeah.
too. They're just like, you should have been a soothsayer. Like, you can read people's minds.
Yes.
Like, how do you know all of this?
And she's so emotionally in tuned about it. Like, remember there was a
Yes,
scene
yeah.
where Nell just broke down crying because their mom said something. She didn't even really say anything, but she completed a part of the story. And Nell had put the puzzle pieces together in her head and just broke down sobbing and like went and hugged
Oh no.
Lara. And the rest of us, including me, was like, what the heck just happened? But Mom knew. Like, Lara knew that Nell had put it together.
I'll add that the heartbreak in this story really hits hard too at the end of the summer.
Yeah.
It really hit me hard anyways. I really felt bad for Laura, and the way that she found out the bad news, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the way she found out the bad news, where she kind of had to piece it together, was really well done. And the fact that she leaves Tom Lake without saying bye to anyone says everything.
It's interesting, the parallels in this story to me. So again, I don't want to offer any spoilers, but Laura's relationship with Veronica, her high school friend, is mirrored in her relationship with Palace, but flipped. And so like, I just thought it was brilliant how Ann Patchett sort of created all of these different versions of Laura that led her from her, her childhood really through to her adulthood. And she became, in some ways she became Veronica, and in some ways she became her grandmother, as she moved through her life. And so she has these connections to these women in all these different places. And then of course with her daughter, and there, so many of them are mirror relationships to what she went through as a young woman, and then as an older woman. Like, it's just, yeah. So Jacob, did you like the story? I'm curious.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard to tell. Yes, the thing is, I'm still marinating. I only finished it not even 12 hours ago, and it feels like I need to digest this one. But overall, I feel like there's a lot to take away from it, because narratively speaking, it's fairly simple, but thematically, it does a lot. And if it's maybe think of anything, it's about how our lives are just compilations of moments that lead us to where we are at any given time. And those compilations of moment make you who you are, but that doesn't mean you should dwell on the past. Ramya, what are your final thoughts on the book?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I never even considered the implications of that, or if the author was trying to veer us in a certain direction with just the thought of like destiny versus choices, agency. So this is a new layer. I feel like I have to reread this book now, because she's talking about the past, and she's talking about it in ways that really very explicitly add up to her present, right? Like, if I didn't meet him, then this wouldn't have happened, and that wouldn't have done this to take me here, to then meet this person, to then lead me here. But I don't think at any point, or did I miss it, did the character or the author really put it out to us that, hey, this is her position on like destiny.
She does vaguely ruminate on it a few times. I think at one point she remarks that none of this would have happened if it wasn't for what happened in the first chapter, where she goes on stage at that audition, that she was just there as like an administrator, but just on a whim she decided to audition for a position.
She's like,
she does
I am
ruminate on
Emily.
that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It almost feels like fate, but it's also one thing leads to another, and that leads you places, and that's life. And you never really know where it's going to
Yeah.
take you. But one thing I really appreciate too is that she just seems so not just wise, but content and happy. Like
Yes.
she often remarks that she loves her husband and her daughters and her farm. It's also cozy and heartwarming.
Yeah, because she's almost having to convince people of that, right? Like throughout the book, especially
Yeah.
Emily, who kind of is in a lot of ways an antagonist in this story. Emily's her eldest daughter. Just doesn't believe her. Like, why would you leave Duke for this little life with us here now then? Or why did you leave your life as a theater actress and as your shots for big time fame to then just settle down here at a cherry farm? Like she doesn't believe her. And even Nell, who's like super like yearning to be that big, to have her break or whatever, to go into the theater life, have these moments as well where they're just like, Mom, we don't believe you. There's no way this is where you actually want to be in life.
There's a quote about that which I really loved, and she says, one of the daughters asks her, and I can't remember who it is now. She said, "I don't see why you have to give up one for the other," and Laura answers. She said, "You don't have to. You want to. You just
Yes.
wake up one day and you don't want the carnival anymore. In fact, you
Yes.
can't believe you ever did that." And there's another quote that sort of dovetails into that one, and it talks about all the painful things in life and how you're not certain you'll at the time that you'll ever be able to sort of live through them or that you'll ever be able to let them go. And then as sort of time goes on, she says that memories are replaced by different joys and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things all get knocked aside as well. Until one morning you're picking cherries with your three grown daughters, and your husband goes by, and you're positive that this is all you ever wanted in the
Mm.
world, which is just sort of that's sort of the
Mm.
contentment piece I think that we've been talking about. But it also speaks to destiny versus choice, right? Like
Yeah.
she chooses in some ways the life that she very intentionally chooses in some ways the life she's currently living, but she also chooses in that life to to be present and to be
Mm-hmm.
grateful and to to take it all in, which I think was a feeling that many of us struggled with perhaps during COVID, but also, as the pandemic lessened and it wasn't quite so scary, but we were still all locked down, we sort of had to take stock of the things that were around us and to make a choice about how we were going to get through the next day. I Yeah.
Karen, that's beautifully said. I couldn't have wrapped it up better than that.
Mm-hmm.
Rami, any final thoughts?
No, let's leave it there.
No, that's it. I think it's pretty safe to say we all really enjoyed this book.
Yes.
Agreed?
Yes.
Absolutely. One of my favorites for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the committee agrees that this should be a proper recommendation from AMI Audiobook Review.
Here, here.
Here, here. All right, Karen, thank you so much.
My pleasure. That was great.
If you're interested, that was Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. We highly recommend the Meryl Streep audiobook. Stick with us, we'll be right back. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shemensky with Ramya Amithin and Ismeet Abdel Majid. Rams, Tom Lake is, I guess you can call it a literary fiction, contemporary romance. I know it's not typically
It's
the
a little
type
bit
of
of everything.
thing, though it's a little bit of everything. And it's not typically the type of thing that you would pick up. And I wanted to get into this, but we didn't get the chance while Karen was with us. As someone who's very difficult with romance, like how did you feel about this one?
I loved it because, as Karen said in that conversation, there was a lot of depth to this book, and AKA there was a lot of depth to the actual relationship dynamic in the romances. Reflection or insight or wisdom. And I just thought that was done so well because it fit the character, it fit the type of story. It was, in my opinion, even though it wasn't an easy read, it was easy to understand why it would feel so deep. And essentially, I love that for a romance.
It's not typically the type of thing that I would pick up, and I did enjoy it, but I didn't have that level of comfort that I normally would with my comfort genres. Well,
which is
comfort
not romance, is it?
genre singular, and that's fantasy. It just got me thinking about how firmly set I am in my ways that like when I listen to a fantasy audiobook, I'm just so much more comfortable. I just find it so much more exciting. Did I fall into a trap? Like, is this a problem?
Having a comfort genre? Is that a problem?
Yeah, is that a problem?
No
Like,
way. I think that we've been talking about romance in that sense forever on this show. Romance is either people call it the guilty pleasure, which may be that same sentiment that you're expressing, or comfort or escapism, right? Like that's essentially what comfort genre feels like to me. And we all have some version of that, just stuff we want to go to because it doesn't mean we have to work too hard to read.
what do you think, Niz? Do you have any insight on this? Like, are comfort genres holding us back a little bit? I'm not offering any answers here. I literally just have a lot of questions.
I feel like slightly it might be holding us back a little. Personally, for me, I kind of stick to romance because that's my comfort genre. Like I told you guys, that romance, and I feel like that's just been, my comfort zone. I stick in that same box. But recently I've been trying to get into mystery books, and I'm trying to get out of that safety box. And that whole time that I was into like romance books, because I feel like, it's easy. It's an easy book. It's cozy, and I don't have to think too much when I'm listening to the book, right? It's an easygoing book. So I feel like I do stick to it, and I feel like it was holding me back. And now I'm starting to go into more mystery books. So I've been researching more on mystery books to kind of really get out of my comfort zone.
And if you're going to get into mystery, there's also subgenres to basically every genre. And if you're looking to start reading different types of books, you can curate specifically what type of book you want by exploring subgenres. Like, for example, in mystery, you could choose like a hard-boiled mystery, which is more gritty and realistic, and sometimes it's more violent and vulgar.
Yeah.
But then there's also a cozy mystery, which is like, let's figure out who stole the sign from City Hall, that type of thing, where it's like really not high stakes, but it's like it's kind of comforting and an easy read, but it's just about like discovering and unpacking a mystery, taking in clues and processing it. Like it's an intellectual affair. I kind of think of genres, like I draw parallels between audiobooks / books with like music genres. If you listen to like one type of music all the time, you're kind of depriving yourself from the type of experiences you could be getting from listening to all sorts of other genres, because genres have like their purposes, if you want to put it that way. Like EDM is for dancing, jazz is for... What is jazz for? Putting in the background? I'm sure that would offend people.
No way. Stop it. Jazz is so experimental. You're literally trying to understand dissonance with jazz, I feel.
It's about making disharmonious things sound good. It
makes sense, yeah.
It's the scholarly music. And then there's like classical music or lo-fi, which is really good for studying. But like, for example, like my uncle, the only thing he cares about in music is, can I dance to it? Anytime we listen to music, he's like, why would people listen to this? You can't dance to it. It's the only thing he cares about. And I kind of feel like I take that same type of approach with fantasy, where I'm just like, why am I reading this? I could be reading fantasy.
Huh. But because fantasy evokes the imagination, right? Like people are building entire worlds, entire characters. Sometimes it's based in some level of reality, but it doesn't have to be. So it just completely takes you out of the world as we know it. I think that there's a level of focus as well. Like when you're talking about music, jazz takes a lot of focus to listen to and understand, unless, you're re-listening to things. But if you're picking up like a new jazz piece or a classical piece, you probably want to pay more attention.
Yeah.
Versus lo-fi is just background.
It's
it doesn't require
explicitly
anything.
background. Even the creators would admit that, like, it's literally for background.
It's supposed to be.
And
Exactly.
some book genres are like that too. Not background, obviously. But my point is that different book genres have different purposes. Like, the way a romance reader approaches romance is very different than the way a fantasy reader approaches fantasy. There's different aspects of reading that these types of readers enjoy. Like, we're different readers in our intentions and what we expect to get out of a book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my challenge for that statement is, though, is it really about the genre, or is it about our reading intentions / preferences / habits? You know, like, if I go into a fantasy book, if all of us pick up a fantasy book, we might have very different interpretations of it or likes and dislikes of it because we're just not used to or are very used to this genre.
I think it does have to do with the genre, because authors are readers and authors understand what readers want. If an author writes a mystery novel, for example, he's going to write with the preferences of mystery readers in mind, right? Same thing with romance,
Yes,
same thing with thrillers
but
and
mystery is
fantasy.
an obvious one. Like, mystery, you know, there's an actual mystery. You're intrigued. You're trying to figure it out. You're predicting / following a thread of clues. Whereas something like fantasy is a bit more, if there's no mystery element, it's a bit more ambiguous, no?
Fantasy as a genre it's like a meta genre, because all fantasy really means is that it's fantastical. It doesn't take place in this world, or it doesn't take place in this version of our world. It can encompass mystery and horror and romance, and adventure. Like, it's a lot of things all at once. Whereas you put it well when you say, like, mystery is like it's obvious. I'd say romance is pretty obvious. Horror is pretty obvious. Even historical fiction is pretty obvious. Like, these genres have kind of set boundaries. What I was going to get to is that different genres have, I think they expect you to approach them differently in your reading intentions. Because you need to understand the mindset you need to have when going into a genre. And this goes back to a previous episode where we talked about how to be a better audiobook listener. And that includes, one, knowing what you're going to read. Like, that book that I read, How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler, was saying that it's really important to not go into a book blind. Please don't mind the pun. And to read it with an open mind. And I think I interpret that statement, to read a book with an open mind, is to understand how the typical reader of that genre approaches it. So if you're a typical romance reader, like, don't put your romance lens when you're reading a mystery novel. So I have a couple genres here and kind of what the typical listener of that genre enjoys out of these books, what they take out of them. So, for example, like, a mystery reader likes the intellectual challenge of solving a puzzle. That's like the main thing in mystery, right? Thriller readers enjoy intense, fast reading experiences with intricate plots. Romance readers like emotional connection, chemistry and tension, and happy endings. That's a huge part of romance. Fantasy readers like imaginative worlds and a lot of creativity. Again, it's a bit of a vague genre. Historical fiction, they really like detailed and accurate portrayals of historical settings, not events, to be clear. And they like learning about history through the lens of personal experiences. I think that's where historical fiction really shines. In nonfiction, it's about learning, expert insights, and practical applications. So for example, like, you can't be going into like a historical fiction with the lens of romance because you're looking for like an emotional connection with characters and
Yeah,
tension and romance,
but
but that's not what the author was trying to do. Like, do you see where I'm going with this? You're literally
Yep.
not coming to terms with the reader. Do you see my point?
But that's not what the author's trying to do. But naturally, we're going to put on that same lens that we're used to. I don't know about you,
Yep.
but I feel like if I go out of my comfort zone and I pick a book that I wouldn't generally pick, I feel like I would still have that same lens. Oh, I'm going to keep comparing it to the books that I am usually listening to.
Yeah. Because there's a sense of inserting yourself in some of these genres. It's not true for everything, especially not nonfiction, and potentially not for historical, what do you call that? Historical
fiction.
Yeah. Like, the main purpose or like this underlying intention is not to insert yourself in some of these genres. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that as a main thing. But for a lot of these, thriller, mystery, fantasy, romance, regardless of genre, you're kind of inserting yourself in the world or as one of the characters, or you're looking for that connection and chemistry you talk about in romance. I don't think that that's exclusive to romance. And that's why I agree with Eunice. Like, there's some level of us feeling like finding, if not a comfort, there's like a personal purpose when we read a lot of this stuff, most of it in fiction.
And I feel like that's part of our reading habits, right?
Reading habits, but also just the way we connect with art, with writing, with whatever, like things, experiences.
I think let's try to lock into where we're actually disagreeing here. Are you guys saying that it's nearly impossible to take off your reader glasses, your specific genre reading glasses, to like basically ignore your preferences in order to better enjoy another book? It's like nearly impossible to do. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think what I'm saying is certain genres are harder than others because either we're not used to it or we're not finding that element of comfort in some level in that genre. I'll give you an example.
That element of connection too.
Yeah. For me, nonfiction is easier when it's a memoir because I'm reading someone's story and I can like empathize or connect to them somehow. Whereas reading something like, I don't know, a historical fiction, especially if it's not based on a person and more based on like a subject or a time period or something, I find it difficult to get into because I'm still trying to place myself in there somewhere. Well, I wanted to ask you, what is it that makes a particular genre difficult for you? Maybe start there.
I think we agree on this. That sometimes it's just your personal preferences for reading books just doesn't align with a certain genre. I think it's that simple.
But what is that preference for you?
For me specifically, I enjoy creative worlds. I really dislike mundanity, if you want to make that a word. Like, contemporary books just don't interest me all that much. I'm really into the escapism aspect of books. The thing is, like, what I'm trying to say here with the different genres, I'm giving advice, I suppose, even though I'm not like fully convinced of it, to be honest, is if you're going to read a genre that's outside of your comfort zone, like Tom Lake was to me, is to understand what the typical reader of that genre takes out of it and then put yourself in that mindset. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah? It's just difficult. I agree with you. Yeah, it's not easy to do that. Now the question is that worth the challenge, right? Because it's difficult. Like, it's worth the challenge, right? Because if, like, Rams, I know you're not a huge fan of historical fiction. Like, if you really put in the effort to read a well-regarded work of historical fiction, you'd have to put in the effort to enjoy it, right? Like, you'd have to go into the mindset where you actually try to enjoy it, right? You don't go into it negatively with your pre-existing notions of historical fiction.
With the historical fiction, for example, the focus that it would take for me to have the intention translate to actually picking up the information from the book, right, can feel very difficult because it's just not a genre I'm used to. It's something that I actually have a lot of like, negativity around, thinking like, I don't know if I'll be able to, enjoy this, or will I be able to take in all the information that was intended for me, which goes back to all the conversations we've had about reading habits and, deliberately going in, pausing, making sure you're reflecting on what you're reading as you're reading, all those good things and good advice. But it still means that it's very difficult. Is it worth the payoff? Yes. But I think you need to understand what makes a particular genre difficult for you and be able to kind of understand what level you're at in order to pick up that genre.
Be ready for the challenge, right? Like
yeah.
It also depends on the genre.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Whatever genre you pick up, like it'll be different for each one. Like the challenges are unique, but they're not challenging in the sense that it's a difficult read. They're challenging in the sense that they kind of go against your typical reading habits and preferences,
or your biases, right?
Or your biases.
Like what makes certain things challenging. Like, okay, are you going to pick up a self-development book anytime soon, Jacob, on your own record?
No, I don't need any self-development.
You see what I'm saying? Case in point. Like, if I'm curious about cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm down to pick up a book on that. But somebody else may not want to. But if that was a suggestion on a book club, you'd maybe like roll your eyes and think, oh my gosh, and read it. But as you're reading, you're still kind of poo-pooing the concept of this genre altogether, potentially.
Well, in the concept of a book club, it's almost like homework, right? Like
exactly.
It feels like work, and therefore you're not in the right mindset to enjoy it. So it's all about how you
already
approach it.
You already had that mindset before you even started listening to the book. So that's gonna change your perception of it during the book.
And honestly, that applies to music, movies, TV shows, any kind of entertainment. Yeah. Just the mindset going into it is so important. I think that's all the time we have. And we're not going to be back for another month. We're going on a bit of a hiatus here, but we will be back better than ever. So in a little while, Ramya, Nisreen, it was really good doing the show.
It's been a blast.
Yeah. Enjoy your summers. And I hope you have lots of reading.
You too.
All right, that's it. If you have any feedback, we will be getting it to it once we come back. You can call us at 1-866-509-4545, or you can leave us an email at feedback@ami.ca. I'm Jacob Shamansky. This was AMI Audiobook Review. Thanks for listening.